Okay, in this one, I'm going to show you how to take an empty model, throw on a free texture, add edgeware, and then add a bunch of additional grunge layers on top of that to make this a really interesting, grungy, old-looking texture, as opposed to just kind of like a default texture look. So this is the technique I use on pretty much all of my models. I don't always add edgeware and all that, but I'm using this kind of stuff all the time. So yeah, it's really, really powerful and it's super easy to do. It looks a bit complicated with all these nodes, but I'll go through it and explain it one by one and show you some techniques so that it's not as confusing and it's easier to mix in a bunch of different things at once. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so let me start with this empty, no textured model right here. And the first thing I need to do is just actually get something on here, like a texture, maybe from a free website. So I usually use Quixel Megascans, but sometimes I use free textures from like these websites right here. Textures.com. If you made an account on textures.com recently, most of the stuff is no longer free, but if you had an account from before, it's still free. So there's lots of good stuff on here. Ambient CG is also really good. They have just a lot of free 4K textures you can download, but there's no like just regular images, but it's fine. Same with Polyhaven. This is kind of similar to Ambient CG. So just any of these websites have tons of free textures that you can use to follow along here. So I'm going to use one from Ambient CG, which I've used before, and I'll just show you how to set this up from nothing. So I'm sure you know how to texture, like apply a basic texture to a model already, but I'll just quickly run through this. So we need color map, roughness, and normal GL. That's the one that Blender uses. Okay, so these need to be non-color, of course. Non-color, and we'll just take that normal map. So boom, run this in here, run this in here, run this to the roughness, and run this to the color. Okay, so standard regular texture setup, right? Color to the color, roughness to the roughness, normal map through the normal map node, and then into the normal input on the principal shader, right? Regular texture setup. And that gives us this, okay? So you can stop here if you just want a regular texture, of course, but I want to spice this up. I want to add layers of grunge. I want to add edgeware. I want to make it look awesome. So here's how I'm going to do that. First of all, I guess let's start with edgeware. So the way I like to do edgeware is actually by using the ambient occlusion node. So if you've seen a tutorial on this before, a lot of people will actually use a different setup of like the bevel node with the geometry node, not geometry nodes, but the geometry node in the shader editor. And then you combine those in a weird way with like some vector math node. I don't like doing it that way because it guarantees that you get like edgeware on the inside creases where it shouldn't actually be worn. So with the ambient occlusion, it's a bit better, although that does happen a bit. Anyways, here's how I do it. Ambient occlusion goes here. And what I'm going to do actually is set up the ambient occlusion by itself and then mix it into the color afterwards, just so that it's really clear exactly what this effect is doing. So the first thing I need to do is lower the samples because I don't need 16. It looks pretty similar the whole way through, and like whatever number you set this to doesn't matter that much, just as long as it's above like 3 or 4 or 5. So 5 is going to be fine. And to preview exactly what this node is doing, I'm just going to Control-Shift-Click on the ambient occlusion. That just sends this straight out. And then if you want to get back to the texture, you just Control-Shift-Click the principal shader. So this just previews any node, the direct output from that node. Okay, so let's preview this and let's work with this. So ambient occlusion by default is actually the opposite of edgeware because it's only going to do darker parts on the inside creases of this object. So to get it to be actually doing the opposite effect, if you just click this button inside and then lower the distance, you will see that it's actually now highlighting or making the outside edges darker, which is perfect for this edgeware effect. Let me take a color ramp now and just drop it in here. Sorry, color ramp, because I want this to be very clear what this is doing. So I'm going to increase the contrast and just make sure you can very clearly see exactly what this effect is doing right here. Okay, so now the thing is with edgeware, it's actually, you kind of want the opposite of this, where you want the main color to stay the same, but the outside edges to become brighter than they were before. So to do that, I'm going to flip this around. So let's take the white handle on the color ramp and just move it to the opposite side. And I can just move this over here and just kind of drag this to whatever makes sense. So that's going to be fine. Maybe just pull this up a little bit. Anywhere here is going to be okay. And then I'm going to lower the distance down to like somewhere around here, 0.02, 0.01, 0.03, somewhere in that range. It depends how big the model is you're working with too. But something like that's going to be fine. And then this checkbox right here, only local, just means that intersecting objects won't be affected by it. So I'll just turn that on. Okay, so we've got this now. So we've got everything is becoming black except for the edges, which are becoming white. But like I said, I want it to be I want everything else to stay the color it was before. Because if I multiply this in right now, multiply is going to leave the dark parts and erase the bright parts, which I actually don't want. I want what I just said, everything to be the same and the edges to be brighter than they were. So here's how you do that. You could just use a mix RGB, or rather a mixed color node, and then like bring this in and then like just run this into the slot B and then put it on like overlay or multiply, and then you could like, that could work. I'm gonna lower the specular here because it's just bothering me a little bit. So that could work, but you'll notice that like everything becomes very, very dark very quickly. So to kind of offset that and make it not just pitch black, you can actually take the darkest point of the color ramp, which is making everything dark, right? This value right here is what's driving that darkness. And you can actually bring that up all the way to 1. So if it's at 1, right now this is doing nothing, because if you multiply in a value of 1, it's actually not making anything darker, so it's just going to stay the same, right? If I move the factor, it's going to stay the same. But, so if I leave the handle that used to be black actually at 1, and then I take the other handle, and I move that above 1 to, say, 10, or whatever number above 1, I enter that. Now, everything is actually the same color it was before, except the edges are now, I guess, 10 times brighter. It's not really 10 times brighter, it's just a bit brighter, but any value above 1 is going to make that show up. And this looks a bit strange because it's going to be like this thing is now down here, but the value right here is at 10, so it's working fine. Okay, now you can control the mix factor right there. So that's a good starting point for Edgeware. If I wanted to add more detail in here, I could actually add some noise in here. So I might preview this again. I might just take this out and just have this kind of separate chunk running along here to demonstrate how I'm going to add noise, because it gets a bit confusing with all these nodes together. So let's take a noise texture. And to get this in here so that it kind of, basically I want this to erase some of the brightest points of these lines here, because I don't like how it's just a solid, straight, clear line. Because for Edgeware, we want to introduce actually wear on the edge. So I want to erase some of these points, or like some of these straight lines-ish. So here's how I'm going to do that. Let's take a mix color, drop it in right after the ambient occlusion, run the noise into slot B, and then I'm just going to, if we change this to multiply, that's not going to work, because now we're just kind of like in a weird way. If I just take a color ramp to demonstrate this and increase the contrast of the noise, we're not really getting the effect that we want, right? Because it's kind of just doing this. If you switch this from multiply to something like screen or add, now, because this is getting inverted after, we're actually able to erase certain parts of this, which is perfect. If that doesn't make sense what's happening, I encourage you to just set this up yourself and then kind of move the sliders around and just change the values a bit, and you'll see exactly how this is all working together. Okay, so for the noise, let's increase the scale because it's a bit too low. Actually, before I do that, one thing I need to do with this noise is actually switch it to object coordinates. It's not that big of a deal, but just that when if you leave it ungenerated, sometimes the noise will get stretched out, whereas object coordinates will make sure the noise is all uniform scale all over this object. Okay, so let me just turn the scale to something that makes sense, and I'll just kind of mess around with these values until I get something that I like. So something like this is going to be fine. Let's increase the roughness, and then increase the detail. Not too high, but something like that. It's going to be fine, and then we can kind of just figure out, yeah, like that's going to be fine. Just a little bit of variation in there, so it's not super clean. All right, nice. Okay, and then let's bring this back into this texture now. So let's So this whole thing, even though it kind of looks like a big spider web at this point, there's only one output from here, right? Everything is running to this color ramp, and the output from this color ramp is what we want to mix into here. So we still have that multiply node from that I dropped in here, so I can just plug that into slot B, and it should be fine. Wonderful. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So it's base color, multiply, and then the edgeware goes to slot B, and then you just dial it in with the factor right here. Okay, so that's edgeware. So you could stop there, and I'd probably want to go in and adjust these sliders a bit and dial in, get the effect a bit closer to something I would want, but this is fine for now. So the next thing I would want to do when texturing this is probably mix in some other grunge materials, some other just grungy surfaces, and like kind of layer these on top of the color that's already there. Let me show you how I might do that. So I'm going to grab something from textures.com. Like I said, textures.com, a lot of the stuff here isn't free anymore, but if you made your account a while ago, you'll still have access to these things for free, I think. But it's just like the things I'm going to use is stuff like this. Like you can just go out in your backyard and take a picture of like some random concrete and get something that's pretty similar, or just go on a walk and like take a picture of the side of a dumpster or something. And there's plenty of surfaces out in life that are just like grungy materials that you could just take a picture of and use, which is exactly what this is. And honestly, if you're that lazy, you could even just use AI to generate one and just use that. You could also go to like a stock photo website and just find some grungy material there, but it's probably not going to be as nice as like a head-on shot from a texture website because it's not really meant for 3D artists, but that can completely work if you just use a stock photo image of like some grungy concrete or something. Anyways, I'm going to take this or any grungy looking thing that just has like some level of detail on it. So I'll just take this and just drop it right into the shader editor. And so this is, the more nodes I add in here, the more confusing and intricate and spiderweb-y it's going to be looking in here. So just try to kind of simplify the visualization that you have to look at here. Just kind of look at the principled shader right here and then work backwards from that. Like instead of starting over here and trying to navigate through it left to right, if you actually start on the end where there's the least amount of inputs on here and then work your way backwards, it's going to be much easier to understand the shading setup that way. Because look, right here, there's only 3 inputs to this principled shader. 2 of them are just the roughness and normal. So the only one going in here is the color, right? So we can kind of ignore everything past this point for now because that's already done. So we just have to worry about this one color input and work off of this. Okay, so let's take this image. I'll go to the UV editor right here, which is going to bring up this. So whatever I have clicked on here is going to show up in the UV editor, right? So if I click that new one, it's going to bring it there. Okay, so to get this mixed in here, there's a few ways we could do it, but let's just take that mixed color node again. So mixed color, let's drop it in here. And let's just run this into slot B. So again, we just have now a factor of fully this thing and fully whatever we had before. So 0 is going to be fully slot A. 1 is going to be fully slot B, which is now this image right here. So to get this to mix nicely, obviously just leaving this on 50% is not really going to do that. Could work, but it's probably just going to look bad. So what I like to do is we need something going into the factor, which is either noise or grunge or even this image itself to use itself as a mask. So let me just show you a few ways you can do this. Let's start by plugging this image into the factor as well. So what that's going to do is now get out of here. Now the values of this picture are going to determine which parts of it get mixed into the color we had before. And we can visualize this by taking a color ramp, just dropping it into the factor, and then I'm just going to Control-Shift-Click on this color ramp, and we can see this right here is now what is going to be used to tell it, okay, how much of slot A and how much of slot B are going to be used. And that's determined by the black and white values of this image. So if I preview this node right here, we can see I can use this color ramp to just dial in exactly, okay, like how much of this grungy thing do I want to show up in here, right? So I could flip this around and kind of do this and work backwards or whatever. It doesn't matter. So I'll just find something that looks kind of interesting, right? So that's fine. And if we go back here, there we go. Now we have more stuff happening here. Maybe I don't really like how light it is though, right? So if I want to make it darker, we can take a curves node, a RGB curves, and let's drop that into the color of this image. So this is going into two slots, remember, the factor, as well as the actual color of slot B. So I'll drop this into where it's actually, the color is going in, so slot B. And then we can just pull this down to match it a little bit. Now it's getting quite saturated, so maybe let's take a hue saturation, put that in there, decrease that a little bit, maybe even decrease the value a bit. But just something in there to add variation to this texture is going to be a really nice way to just spice it up and make it not feel like such a, a default material. Something else we could do on this edgeware is, since we have this like kind of brown color in here right now, I could go to the brighter point on this color, color ramp that's the edgeware, and then just make this a bit saturated. So I could bring it a bit warmer. That might be cool. I like that. All right, nice. And this we could actually swap out for whatever we want. So if I don't like this one, I can just drop in some random other thing, try that. Maybe I don't like that. I can just open this back up, try some random other thing. You can just easily swap this out for whatever you want. So I kind of liked how it was before, so I'll just leave that in there. But yeah, you could just really mess around with different materials. And you could even, right now, like I could just run this whole setup again, like duplicate this, try another image and layer another one on top of this. Because remember, like it's going to look confusing with the more nodes we add in here. But if you just remember to look at it from this side and just kind of work backwards. Look, the only thing going in here is this one color input, remember, right? Because all of these things get fed into this one, they end up at this one node. That goes to the color because the color only has one input. So it's, if you kind of just move all that stuff off to the side and then work from this one input, it's much easier to keep track of where everything is and add new materials and not get super confused as to what is even going on here. Okay. So I might, to demonstrate that, I could add another one by just taking another mix node, dropping another image, run it to slot B, run it to the factor. But I want to show you another way you could mix in another material. So I'm actually going to run this. Let's run this out again and get rid of this. I'll just move it off to the side. So this is just the ambient occlusion now, or the color and the ambient occlusion. Let me show you another way you could actually mix this in. I'll just take that same image actually. So I'll just duplicate this for our demonstration. Let's take another mix color. So instead of using itself as the mix factor, you could just use something else like a noise texture as well. So if I run this to slot B, and then let's take a noise texture, and then that is going to be our factor now. So instead of this image being the factor and the black and white values determining which are slot A and which are slot B, we could use a noise texture. So you could run that in here, color ramp again, increase the contrast of the noise because it's quite soft by default, and then increase the detail and roughness. And so this is going to, you'll notice the noise looks a little stretched out. So if I control T, switch that again to object coordinates, boom, and then just kind of adjust the scale back to where it was. That's another thing you can do, is just mix in some random image using noise as the factor. The other thing you can do is actually switch this. Instead of mixing it in, you could actually multiply this in, and that will make it interact a little bit differently with the underlying material. So you'll notice that multiplying always makes it a bit darker. So I might actually take a curves node, and maybe let's try making this brighter. So I want to put this curves where it's where this texture is going into that color. So I can just do that right here. Remember, slot B is where the color is being affected. So I'll just drop that in here, and then let's increase the brightness of this because I feel like it's just too dark right now with this. That is still kind of cool though, how it's like adding a lot of darkness and really gritty grunginess to this, right? And you could even, mix and match all these techniques together. So you could have one that's getting multiplied in, or you can change these to other blend modes too. Like it doesn't matter which one you put on here. Overlay sometimes looks cool. Screen might look cool. I usually don't use that, but generally multiply and overlay are what I go for. So you could do that, and then you could have another texture that's getting mixed in with itself as the mix factor. You could have another one that's noise as the mix factor. Like, there's so many ways you can use this, and just kind of using different things, like either noise or the texture itself as a mask. That is really, really powerful for just getting tons of variation and different levels of grunge and dirt, and just making this so much more interesting than a default texture. Okay, so let me add in some ambient occlusion now, because we've actually used the ambient occlusion node for edgeware, but you can also use the ambient occlusion node for, of course, regular ambient occlusion, which is, again, adding like shadows, like natural shadows into the kind of the crevices and corners of any object. So let's drop that in. Let's take a mix color node. And again, since I don't really want to look at all this while I'm working on this, because it's just going to be confusing. So I'm just going to look at, again, base color input. There's only one thing going in here, just this one thing that everything kind of leads to. I'm going to work in this space right here. So let's, to mix in the ambient occlusion, let's just drop in that mix color, run the ambient occlusion into slot B. And there we go, it's doing that. I might decrease the distance. And now if I just switch this to multiply, increase the factor, and then just kind of dial in the exact distance that I want, and maybe even use color ramp to just adjust how strong this is. This kind of adds additional natural looking grunge and detail in here. Now the thing is about any of these effects is anytime you use a mix color node, you're going to have an option to plug something into the mix factor, which is essentially going to act as a mask. So you could use the ambient occlusion as a mask for another texture if you want. Like if you want to have grunge only in the corners, you could use that as a mask. Really, it's just about being creative and trying stuff and just adding in grunge in any way you want and trying things in the mix factor. I can't talk. Sorry. And trying different things in that mix factor. So I would say I'm pushing these effects quite far in this one because I want to show exactly what it can do. And also the lighting here is just basic, very natural overcast lighting. So it's going to be extra noticeable. Once this actually goes into a render though, all these effects become a little bit more subtle once you have like lighting and volumetrics and camera movement and all that. So that's why I like keeping this a bit more on the extreme side, because I know that like once it's rendered, it's gonna like these effects looking a bit stronger. I think it looks nicer for the kind of style that I like to go for, but obviously just adjust this to however you want to do and whatever style fits whatever you're making. And yeah, let's do a quick before and after. So this is, if I just kind of take out all of this, let's just take the, whoops, I have to make this a unique texture. Sorry. Take this and let's just run this straight in here. Boom. So it depends what you want, obviously. But if you want, you know, a grungy, old-looking, worn-down texture, this is a really nice way to do it. It's just layer on these different textures, throw on edgeware, make it a lot more grungy, and you can really get tons of different looks by just swapping out the kinds of image textures you throw on as those additional grunge layers on top. So yeah, this is pretty much the technique that I use to texture almost all of my models. Obviously, I don't always add edgeware, but I often do mix in other textures, other grunge maps, ambient occlusion, and yeah, like really plugging things into this mix factor and just trying interesting things to go in there. That's really the key here that I want to demonstrate and show that like you can do some really crazy stuff by just plugging in different images into that socket. Okay, so yeah, I hope that was useful. Like I said, if you want to download these models, I did the same exact technique on all these here. You can go to the link in the description. There's a free pack. I made it in the last video. If you want to watch me make these, the last video I did was a modeling one, so you can just go and watch that. Anyways, hope that was useful. Yeah, anyways, bye. Take care.